turn it over to our FSA team. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm going to share my screen. Latrina, I think you have to take your slides down. There you go. All right, can everyone see it?
Yes.
Great. All right, is Miss Jamie White on the line?
Yes, I'm here, Jennifer.
All right, I will turn it over to Jamie White, who serves as the Assistant Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs for the National Office.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for bearing with us as we work through technical difficulties. And while there was a bit of a pause, we have a great program for you all, and I'm honored to be here on behalf of our Acting Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs, John Burge. We're going to kick off the discussion today with a brief overview of FSA programs at the onset or at the top of the hour, and then we're going to transition into more detailed information with our subject matter experts who are on the line. So from the farm programs perspective, I'm excited that we're all here today to walk through not only farm programs applicability, but what we do to onboard a new customer and walk through the building blocks of participating in FSA farm programs and eligibility criteria. We're partnering certainly with our outreach folks, and we have great resources as well on the line from the Farm Loan Program Division, with Brannigan Snyder representing our Deputy Administrator for Farm Loan Programs. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we're moving through the overview of programs. Again, as you have questions, please go ahead and make sure you're entering those in the chat. Certainly, we have lots of folks on the line and we want to engage in that dialogue. So certainly, please make sure you're entering that information in the chat. Also, I know as you logged on, you all were probably very well aware that we are recording this session. So the session will be recorded. And as I understand it, and we'll defer to Latrina and Jennifer, this will also be posted on NACD's YouTube channel for follow-up review or for review of those, or for viewing for those who weren't able to join us today. Again, at the conclusion of the seminar or the webinar today, there will be a survey. And as always, we want to continue to improve upon our informational sessions and outreach engagements. So we would seek your involvement and engagement in completing that survey. But at this point in time, we'll go ahead and transition into a high-level overview of the Farm Service Agency and the programs that we offer. So one of the key items with FSA, and I know for all of you, you have a high level presence, obviously that boots on the ground perspective and providing technical assistance and engagement with folks involved in agriculture. FSA's workforce is, we have a very large presence with over 11,000 staff and 51 state offices and more than 2,100 county offices. So we do have a great opportunity to engage directly with producers as well as partners and stakeholders. And I'm just going to pause. I see there was a question. Are we good on audio before we continue?
I can hear you.
Okay.
If anybody else can, it should be fine.
I can hear you.
Latrina, Jen, if we have folks who are having difficulty hearing, I think that might be a smaller number. Should they just log out and log back on? Because it appears that the large majority are able to hear and see fine.
Yes, that will be good. Yes, log in and log back on.
All right, thank you. Okay, we'll continue on. Just very briefly, we'll provide a structure of FSA, just the overview of our organization. We do have at the headquarters office, definitely there's a standard structure with the FSA administrator, who currently is Zach Ducheneau, who serves as our administrator. Supporting the administrator, we also have the associate administrator, which is Steve Peterson. And Steve is a career person serving in that associate administrator capacity. We have 3 deputy administrators, which oversee different aspects of the Farm Service Agency. I have the honor of representing our Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs, John Burge, who covers the conservation commodity title, as well as ad hoc disaster assistance programs, compliance, etc. Brannigan Snyder is here today representing our Deputy Administrator for Farm Loan Programs, Bill Cobb, overseeing the farm loan vein. And then we also have our Deputy Administrator for Field Operations, Mr. Marcus Graham, who oversees state and county operations, works with the SEDs, the state offices, and the county offices on a continual basis. There are the division directors, which are working specifically in an area of interest that might be a program area of interest or operational component. We have branch chiefs, section chiefs, and then managers that support each of those individual functions. The field delegation of authority falls under DAFO, that Deputy Administrator for Field Operations, under the leadership and oversight of the SED, who is politically appointed. The state committee is also politically appointed, and they oversee the implementation of farm programs specifically. They're heavily involved in the outreach vein and support due process. And then at the local county office level, many of you are familiar with our county executive directors and the farm loan managers that co-manage those service center activities for FSA farm loan and farm programs. And then we do have the locally appointed county committee that provides oversight and guidance specifically on the farm program front, as well as staffing. We can continue on. Thank you. So what does FSA offer? Again, many of you are very familiar with FSA's mission. Specifically, we do focus predominantly in both farm programs, which I'll provide a bit more insight about, and specifically the disaster assistance programs, many of which are ad hoc. So those are authorized and provided funding as appropriate by Congress. We have the conservation programs that are governed by the conservation title. And we also have safety net and risk management programs, and also price support programs, many of which are authorized by the Farm Bill and or extended if the Farm Bill is extended. And then we do have a standing risk management program, which is the non-insured crop disaster assistance program, which is also ongoing. And FSA farm loans encompass ownership loans, operating loans, microloans, and loan guarantees. And that's something that we'll dive into deeper when Brannigan's covers the presentation. We're going to dive a little bit more into depth under conservation programs, and FSA does offer a broad suite of conservation programs that are intended to assist producers with the establishment and maintenance of conservation practices. There are also additional conservation programs that focus on emergency assistance and provide funding and technical assistance in response to disaster, to rehabilitate land and restore structures. And our flagship program in general for conservation is the Conservation Reserve Program. There are many different components of the Conservation Reserve Program, and each of those components may offer different sign-up opportunities and enrollment under CRP. Clear 30 was recently in prior years introduced more as a pilot practice. This is now a nationwide program offering enrollment for up to 30 years under Clear 30. The Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, that is a component or a subcomponent of CRP that leverages partnerships, not only with other state government or tribal government, but actually recently was enhanced to include non-governmental organizations. So it is a great opportunity to partnership and target strategic conservation goals and offer further incentives for producers to enroll in those CREP agreements. We have the continuous CRP sign-up, which is an ongoing sign-up without a targeted sign-up period. Farmable Wetlands Program, the Forest Management Initiative, the general CRP sign-up is probably one program that most folks are familiar with when we consider the CRP program. Again, that is a competitive sign-up, and it is offered during specific sign-up periods, oftentimes a 6-week sign-up period for folks to offer land for consideration under general CRP. The Grassland CRP program is a competitive sign up as well that is offered under a separate and distinct sign up period. We are actually just coming off our most successful grassland CRP sign up to date. So we had significant interest in grassland CRP. The safe acres for wildlife management, often referred to as SAFE. Again, that's very similar to CREP, targeting CRP enrollment for specific wildlife and habitat purposes. The Transition Incentives Program is a component of CRP, which is really focused on transitioning that land from a landowner to a newer beginning farmer or rancher. The ECP program, that is focused in the vein of rehabilitation following disaster and or emergency situations, very similar to emergency forest restoration program. The difference is ECP is focusing on farmland, where EFRP is targeted on forest lands. And then we have the grassroots source water protection program. And if we can continue on, we can dive into these specific topics a little bit more directly. In general, CRP is a program that is intended to provide cost-effective assistance to producers to improve soil, water, and wildlife resources. We focus on the restoration of wetlands and other environmentally sensitive land. CRP, as designed, places land under contract for 10 to 15 years, and then FSA does pay that annual rental rate, which is issued in early October following the end of the fiscal year. And those annual rental rates are intended to also support the establishment of a conservation practice. And we do also provide cost share assistance in some cases to assist with the cost of plantings and practice installation. Again, the three primary areas of CRP sign up are general CRP, again, which is a competitive sign up using the Environmental Benefits Index to rank the offers, otherwise known as EBI. That's what we refer to that internally at FSA. Upon conclusion of that sign up period, USDA evaluates the offers submitted and at that point in time determines an EBI cutoff score, and acceptance and or rejected offer notifications are issued to participants. The CRP continuous sign up is ongoing. It's non-competitive. This is really focusing in on the most environmentally sensitive land. Offers are automatically accepted if they meet that resource conserving measure need. There's a need for that practice and the site is suitable. So that is an ongoing sign up activity in which both FSA and NRCS are actively engaging with producers. The grassland CRP sign up that we refer to as a working lands conservation program, again, is a competitive sign up that has gained a lot of momentum in recent years. There are alternative ranking factors utilized rather than the Environmental Benefits Index. Grasslands are enrolled to assist producers in protecting that rangeland and pasture land from conversion or development. But again, the intent is to maintain those areas as viable working grazing lands in support of livestock operations. We can continue on, please. ECP, again, is the conservation program that is focused, again, on the rehabilitation of farmland. And we utilize ECP oftentimes to provide disaster response following natural disasters. We also use this to put in place methods for long-term sustainability of water conservation during severe drought. ECP not only provides funding, but a key component of ECP is the technical assistance that is provided in partnership with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. ECP provides cost share, and there's two different levels of cost share that are provided. 75% of the allowable cost to implement the approved restoration practice. So we're looking at allowable, not actual costs. For instance, that might be fence replacement or fence repair. But 75% is the baseline cost share provided, and there is an offering for up to 90% of the allowable costs for producers who certify as limited resource, socially disadvantaged, or beginning farmers and ranchers. These are folks that may fall under our underserved participant category, and that certification is made via a form CCC 860, and that's simply a producer certification that they do meet the criteria to be eligible for that higher level of cost share assistance. ECP is limited to $500,000 per person or legal entity per disaster. And we do offer an advance payment of up to 25% of that expected cost share. When we're looking at ECP, most commonly, there are varied forms of practices available under ECP, but we see it a lot for debris removal, and that might be following flood, tornadoes, etc. Fence repair, restoring conservation practices destroyed by natural disasters. I see the question coming in. ECP drought is a strong player. We see that in many areas, and that might be for temporary or permanent water needs in response to drought as well. We can continue on. The Emergency Forest Restoration Program, in my mind, I liken ECP and EFRP as sister programs focusing on distinctly different land needs, but EFRP supports owners of non-industrial private forests to restore forest health damaged by natural disasters. Again, this is done by authorizing payments to restore the disaster damaged forests. So wildfires or fires may be applicable under EFRP. And again, very similar to ECP, it provides cost share assistance for up to 75% of the allowable cost. EFRP does not offer that additional bump up to 90% currently, like ECP does for underserved participants. It also does provide up to $500,000 per person or legal entity per disaster. And similar to ECP, what we're seeing under EFRP are practices that involve debris removal, to remove down or damaged trees, site preparation, restoration of forest land roads, and beyond working with NRCS under EFRP, oftentimes we're working, for instance, with the Forest Service and technical experts that have the necessary expertise to support that forest restoration activity. We can continue on. The Grassroots Source Water Protection Program is another example of how FSA partners with others in administering conservation activities. And this is a joint project that is conducted with the nonprofit National Rural Water Association. And the focal point is to prevent source water pollution in states through voluntary practices. Again, that's another key component of FSA conservation programs, is they are voluntary, and we do incentivize those voluntary practices. The practices are installed by producers and other landowners at the state and local level. FSA, again, leverages technical assistance through state rural water associations that are operating a source water protection program in the given state. And those same rural water associations deliver that assistance in developing the source water protection plans within watersheds. And the overarching common goal is to prevent the contamination of drinking water supplies. We can continue on. Okay, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, otherwise known as CREP. We've been working actively over the last several years to enhance our CREP applicability throughout the United States. CREP is a unique opportunity that allows us to target state-specific or even nationally significant conservation concerns. It supplements federal funds with non-federal funds to promote participation. The partners that we work with, again, they aren't all governmental partners. Many are, we're looking to expand our applicability with the non-governmental organizations. And those folks are providing matching funds that might include cash. It might include in-kind contributions and/or technical assistance to make those CREP agreements more diverse. In exchange for removing that environmentally sensitive land from production or establishing a permanent resource conserving plant species, the farmer or rancher is going to be paid an annual rental rate along with other federal and non-federal incentives, which are negotiated and established in each very unique, I will highlight or amplify, very unique CREP agreement. So that's the beauty of CREP. You're targeting a significant need, and to help obviously incentivize participation in CREP, there may be unique incentives to support that enrollment. To promote that voluntary participation of a contract enrolled frequently or not frequently, typically 10 to 15 years. Up until 2022, all CREP partners were state agencies. FSA has taken steps, and we've worked effectively in partnership with our outreach folks, as well as a broader base of stakeholders, to develop more robust CREP participation, and looking at the NGO applicability and even our tribal nations. At this point in time, FSA has 38 active CREP agreements with 26 states. We have a very robust and diverse CREP team in the headquarters office that is now comprised of 4 staff specifically devoted to CREP activities to facilitate more active engagement. FSA has 3 tribal TREP agreements and continues to conduct outreach to engage with other tribes and non-governmental organizations to consider this viable partnership opportunity with USDA. The CREP agreements are with the 3 tribes in the Great Plains, and there are ongoing conversations with other tribal nations surrounding the potential CREP applicability to target their specific needs in those areas as well. Price support programs are another suite of programs that we do oversee and implement under the Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs. Price support programs are intended to provide that commodity price support assistance. Most frequently, what folks are familiar with are commodity loans and loan deficiency payments. We also do provide support to the dairy industry. So we have the Dairy Indemnity Payment Program, which provides direct assistance for contaminated milk and livestock that need to be depopulated due to contamination. We also offer the Dairy Margin Coverage Program, which is a risk protection component available to dairies, which is based on the margin between national price of milk and average cost of feed. For those of you who are watching the dairy prices, we have most recently seen prices hit an all-time low. So DMC has become a significant component of risk protection for our dairies. The Farm Storage Facility Loan Program is a great program that provides low interest support to producers who need assistance in establishing storage, handling, and transportation of eligible commodities. So you might see that through equipment, you might see that through the construction of grain bins, drying equipment, things of that nature. Our price support programs also include a unique program that's significant to producers that are in island states or geographically remote areas. Alaska, Hawaii, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico fall into applicability for the geographically disadvantaged farmer rancher program. And that's focusing on transportation costs of ag commodities specific to those areas. And then marketing assistance loans and the loan deficiency payments, those programs work hand in hand. Marketing assistance loans provide recourse and non-recourse loans to support interim financing at harvest time to help ag producers meet cash flow needs. They don't need to sell the commodities at that time when market prices are at the all-time low for harvest. So that's a viable option to provide that cash flow support. And then loan deficiency payments are equal the amount of the applicable loan rate where the commodity is stored, and it exceeds the effective marketing assistance loan rate. Again, 2 programs that provide key price support based on market prices. Safety net programs, we do offer, again, a suite of safety net programs, some of which are authorized by the Farm Bill, some of which actually fall more into that ad hoc disaster assistance as authorized by Congress. One of the flagship safety net programs that is authorized by the Farm Bill and was extended and enhanced under the last Farm Bill is the Ag Risk Coverage Price Loss Protection Program, otherwise known as ARC PLC here at FSA. There is an annual election and enrollment process in which we engage with producers. After Farm Bill is implemented, this tends to become more of, again, just simply that annual election and enrollment process. It still requires some decision making, but it's not quite as significant as when we first roll out a Farm Bill. The Ag Risk Coverage component is an income support program providing payments when the actual crop revenue declines below a specified guarantee level. And our price loss coverage program provides income support payments when the effective price for a covered commodity falls below its reference price. The non-insured crop disaster assistance program is a risk protection component offered by FSA. And this is essentially very similar to crop insurance. It does provide financial assistance to producers of non-insurable crops. So by non-insurable, there's not a correlating product offered by the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation in traditional crop insurance measures. So this would be the program that provides that assistance specifically to those non-insurable crops. And again, it's to provide assistance when natural disasters result in lower yields, crop losses, or even prevented planting of crops. Historically underserved participants are eligible for a waiver of the service fee for the catastrophic level coverage. So catastrophic level coverage is 50-55. So at that point in time, they have to suffer 50% of the loss on their own. So the deductible is that 50%, and NAP would pick up the remaining 50%. And NAP does also offer a buy-up option, and underserved participants would be eligible for a 50% premium reduction on those higher coverage levels. One key enhancement that I would like to highlight for your awareness is, again, underserved participants, and that would be going back to the CCC 860, where underserved participants can certify to a historically underserved status. That may also include beginning farmers or ranchers, limited resource producers, etc. If there is a CCC 860 that's already on file, FSA can utilize that as an application for NAP coverage. And at that time, participants, when they experience disaster, can come visit their local FSA office, and they have that immediate access to NAP coverage to provide assistance for that disaster occurrence. And then our goal is to continue to engage with those producers to support that NAP coverage moving forward. Additional safety net programs, again, not an exhaustive list because this is ever changing here at FSA. We have the tree assistance program, which in general is to focus assistance on the not the establishment, but the replanting of eligible orchards following disaster. We have the organic certification cost share program. We have the organic transitional education and certification program. Both of those programs are providing key support to operations that are transitioning to organic and covering many of the costs associated with becoming organic or transitional organic. We recently administered the spot market hog pandemic program. That program has since been closed out, as have many of our other pandemic assistance programs, and we can continue on. Just very briefly, we'll dive into safety net programs that target more of livestock producer needs. In recent years, FSA programs, as well as Congress, have been very interested in providing equitable assistance to our livestock producers, similar to that of crop producers. We have the Emergency Assistance Program for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm Raised Fish Program. Oftentimes, we refer to this as the catch-all program. And when we talk about some programs, sometimes we might say, or in this case, the specific program, it covers everything but the kitchen sink. And really what ELAP is intended to do is to provide assistance to livestock producers. And again, that includes producers of honeybees and farm-raised fish for losses associated with a natural disaster that are not covered by other disaster assistance programs, including NAP, the Livestock Forage Disaster Program, which covers grazing losses due to drought or wildfire on public lands, and the Livestock Indemnity Program, which covers livestock losses due to eligible disaster events. Recently, we've made many enhancements to ELAP in response to specific concerns expressed by livestock producers throughout the nation. And we've been looking at providing more applicability specifically to provide assistance for transportation assistance. We know that we have increased feed costs, transportation of feed to livestock. We also have transportation of livestock to feed, and that those result in increased costs for producers suffering those drought conditions. So ELAP has been enhanced to include transportation assistance as well. The livestock forage program provides direct assistance to livestock owners, contract growers. Essentially, they must have a risk in livestock as well as a risk in the land. They have to have both the livestock and the grazing acres. And in the event they suffer a loss based on a qualifying drought, referencing the U.S. Drought Monitor of D2 for 8 consecutive weeks, D3 or greater, they would trigger eligibility for the livestock forage program, which is driven based on filing that acreage report and simply completing an application at FSA. And the livestock indemnity program is really targeting livestock losses due to natural disasters and excess of normal mortality. So there is always going to be a normal mortality that FSA is not going to provide assistance for under LIP. And that's not, that's something that's going to be generally applicable to livestock producers based on the livestock species and weight range. We have established normal mortality that would be considered before we provide that assistance on a per head or per critter basis. And most recently, we have enhanced the livestock indemnity program to be more encompassing of diseases that may be exacerbated by weather, such as Mycoplasma bovis in bison, and the unique impact to the bison industry. One item that we cannot amplify enough, and when we're engaging with stakeholders, producers, our goal is to get education and information in the hands of our valued partners who can help support producers who are navigating disasters and trying to walk through probably the cumbersome paperwork to get that key assistance from federal agencies. But all of our disaster programs do have notice of loss requirements currently, and that's something we're working to provide broader flexibility for to ensure that producers have access to FSA disaster assistance. There are varied reporting timeframes. Some of the shorter timeframes are 72 hours, and that would be more crop loss focused for those folks who have NAP coverage, 30 days up to 90 days, depending on the crop and the program. And so we cannot express enough when disaster occurs, when folks are aware of the disaster. And it may not be simply that we've had a blizzard come through, we need to call immediately based on the blizzard. It might be after the snow melts, we find dead baby calves, or maybe there's predatory losses associated with wolves or eagle depredation, things of that nature. Once a producer becomes aware they've experienced a loss, the best thing they can do is simply pick up the phone and call the office, visit the office, and at least create awareness for FSA. And that not only helps the producer, but that also helps FSA to begin pursuing what I would say would be more targeted outreach and education to support producers in times of disasters. And it also helps us identify if there are any impediments to participation, to which the Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs can consider if there are flexibilities applicable to support losses in those given areas. Okay. Before we transition and I turn things over to Brannigan Snyder, I do also want to flag, I know we have folks on the line from the Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs area that are going to walk through specifics such as farm records, eligibility. We have Tyler Gilkey and Becca Satoris who are on the line. I also know we have our Deputy Director for the Conservation Division on the line, Mr. Paul Hansen, so he is also available. And we will stand by to be able to monitor questions that pop up in the chat and help to get you all the best information. So thank you again for your attention. Sorry for taking so much time. And I would like to turn things over to Mr. Brannigan Snyder.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you're at. My name is Brannigan Snyder. I'm with Farm Loan Programs, a senior loan officer in the loan making division, direct loans fund management branch. Go to the next slide. So jumping right into the lending basics. Building a successful farm is a significant financial investment and can be especially challenging for beginning farmers who are not financially ready to access credit from commercial lenders. So FSA can be the first lender of opportunity. FSA's goal is to help farmers and ranchers grow, and graduate from progression lending to conventional lending. To emphasize program progression, you will work very closely with your loan official, so be sure to be honest and open, as communication is key as they're able to assist you. The 5 C's of credit are character, capital, collateral, conditions, and capacity, and are very important to you and your operation, as it is imperative to stay on top of credit, cash flow, and finances. FSA does not make an approval decision based solely on credit score. Instead, FSA will look at the credit history. This includes payment schedules, past due accounts, anything else that may flag on the credit report. All of these are important to ensure the success of your farming operation and repayment of loans. Again, the objective of FSA farm loan programs is to provide supervised credit and management assistance to eligible farmers to become owners or operators, or both, of family farms, to continue such operations when credit is not available elsewhere, or to return to normal farming operations after sustaining substantial losses as a result of a designated or declared disaster. These regulations apply to loan applicants, borrowers, lenders, holders, agency personnel, and other parties involved in making, guaranteeing, holding, servicing, or liquidating such loans. The programs are designed to allow those who participate to transition to private commercial credit or other sources of credit in the shortest period of time practicable through the use of supervised credit, including farm assessments, borrower training, market placement, and borrower graduation requirements. Say operating loans. These are annual operating expenses or general operating expenses such as fuel, seed, fertilizer, and family living expenses that are typically normally due within 12 months or whenever the producer is able to sell their product. For youth loan repayment terms, and they can vary from 1 to 7 years. The length of the loan depends upon the loan purpose and the project. Loans for annual operating expenses, again, are typically for 12 months, but loans for livestock and equipment can be up to 7 years. Farm ownership loans. So there are 3 types of farm ownership loans: regular, joint financing, and down payment. This allows those individuals to select which program is best for their operation. A pretty common request that we see is a request for someone to refinance real estate loans when they currently already have a loan with commercial lenders. However, FSA is unable to refinance any real estate debt from commercial lenders. The direct farm ownership loans offer up to 100% financing and help farmers and ranchers to purchase new farm or ranch properties or to enlarge their current farming operation. The repayment is up to 4 years and the current limit is $600,000. Down payment loan program and the direct farm ownership joint financing loans. The down payment loan program is designed to assist eligible beginning farmers, veterans, and ranchers, and/or minority and women applicants. The down payment program is a special type of direct farm ownership loan program that partially finances the purchase of a farm or ranch. The down payment farm ownership loan program is the only one that does not provide 100% financing for their farm or ranch purchase. This program requires loan applicants to provide a minimum cash down payment of 5% of the purchase price of the farm. The direct farm ownership joint financing loan is another program that assists to provide more farmers and ranchers with access to capital. FSA can lend up to 50% of the cost or the value of the property being purchased. Our commercial lender, or the seller of the farm or the ranch being sold, provides the balance of the loan funds with or without an FSA guarantee. We can go to the next slide. There we go. Microloans. Microloans have a limit of $50,000. There are both farm ownership, and farm operating microloans. Operating microloans can be used for all approved operating expenses, such as initial startup expenses, seed, fertilizer, livestock, etc. The farm ownership loans can be used for approved expenses such as purchasing land or farm, enlarging an existing farm, constructing buildings, paying closing costs. Those are some of the examples. The experience requirements have been modified to accommodate smaller farm operations, beginning farmers, and those with limited to no farm management experience. It is possible that other management and military experience can count towards these requirements for farm ownership loans, while working with a mentor can modify or count towards the operating loan requirements. The interest rate charged for all direct loans is the lower rate in effect at the time of loan approval or loan closing. This is the same for all of our direct loan programs. Now we have guaranteed loans. Guaranteed loans, typically the applicant or the borrower is working without FSA. They begin with a commercial lender. The guaranteed operating loans, they have a 1 to 7 year term, while the farm ownership is up to 40 years. The rate is determined by the commercial lender they're working with. And the 2018 Farm Bill increased the loan guarantee for beginning farmers and underserved farmers from 90 to 95%. You everyone. If you all appreciate the little information I gave on farm loan programs, I'll pass it off now. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have like about a 5-minute intermission here. So, and then we'll get started with the next portion of our program. So see you all back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Tyler Gilkey to do the next portion of our program. Thank you.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're at. So I want to talk about basically getting started with FSA, the basics, and then we're going to look at a few, take a deeper dive into a couple of other building blocks, if you will, for participation in FSA programs. This slide here you see talks about what to bring to the first visit, and I think I would say that maybe there's something that preempts that, and that is our website, farmers.gov. If a person would go to that website, we've got a service center locator tool that a person can go and either look up for where they live or perhaps where their farming interest or potential farming interest is going to be located, can find the county office service center that will service, can provide service to them. And I mention that because I think the appropriate step before this actual first visit may be to reach out to that office, establish contact, perhaps even get an appointment. Most of our offices operate with an appointment. Doesn't mean that we can't take walk-in folks, but certainly it allows also the chance to have a discussion both with the producer and from the county office perspective on what the goal is of that customer or potential customer coming in, what they want to accomplish when they visit our office. So you see the things here, things that may be a good idea to bring to that first visit. The proof of identity helps us. We're going to talk about customer records, but helps us establish the customer record. The subset of information there related to deeds or leases will assist us in establishing a farm record, and we're going to talk about that. And then estate papers or trust documents or articles of incorporation. Some of those can relate to signature authority issues. Some of those things can relate to eligibility issues that Becca Torres is going to talk about, and we can continue on. All right, so once we have that initial appointment with that customer, potential customer, FSA's first primary steps are going to be creating a customer record in the FSA database. That's going to be based on information that we gather from that customer. We are going to ensure that we have a farm record. We're going to take a deeper dive into this, but we'll either provide the existing farm record information to the customer, or we may end up creating a new farm record. And we'll provide a farm number, what we call a farm number, officially a farm serial number. And with the creation of that customer record, and particularly with an email address, it allows us the ability to contact that producer, provide notifications, particularly by email, about programs or new programs, deadlines, and those types of things. You can continue. All right, so the first thing that in the deeper dive here with the building blocks to FSA programs, we want to talk about customer records and we want to talk about farm records. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the customer record, and I'll tell you why that is a little bit down the road here. But if we continue on, we'll talk about the customer record. And that customer record is just as you probably envision it being. It is our name, tax ID, address, phone, email, and potentially demographic information, again, provided by the customer so that we have a customer record that we is our starting point for that person participating in farm programs, FSA farm programs. And that may be an individual record, or that may be if that person has a corporation or has an LLC or has some type of entity that they are choosing to participate as, we may establish a record for that specific entity as well. We can continue. And we have a variety of entity types ranging from, as I mentioned, corporations, LLCs, limited partnerships, general partnerships, estates, revocable trust, irrevocable trust. I'm not naming them all, but a couple that I did want to include here, highlighted in the presentation, is we have entity types that include either Indians represented by BIA or perhaps business type entities that are organized under tribal law, those Indian tribal ventures as we refer to them. So I just highlight these as we do outreach to different groups, that we have a variety of entity types within our system as we find customers for FSA participation. So I mentioned that we create that customer record based on information provided by that customer. It's not our guess. It's stuff that they are telling us, and we capture that on the Form AD 2047. The link here to that form, you can see it through the farmers.gov website. And that form is not only the form to create that new customer record, but as a customer may want to make changes. For example, they've got a new address from what they originally had when they established a record with us. We use that same form for creating those or documenting those changes to that customer record. And this is just a snippet of the 2047 form itself. You see the data we capture here. And the next slide, I think, is the demographic information. And again, the demographic information is optional, but is the form does give the customer the ability to indicate whichever answers they would like to provide as far as demographics go. All right, so that's the customer record. The second important building block, once we know who a person is or what their entity is understanding where they are farming, essentially, and capturing that as a farm record. And a farm number is associated with the land that comprises a farm, and that is a farm as defined by FSA rules and regulations. And I'm going to talk about what a farm as defined by FSA is, but we create this farm as defined by our rules. We provide that a number, a farm number, a farm serial number. We have many existing farms in our farm records database. So it may be that a customer either bought some land or maybe obtained a lease, a prior tenant perhaps retired or lost interest in a piece of ground, and we've got somebody new associated with that piece of ground, and that land had already participated perhaps in our farm records, and it exists in our farm records database. So it may be that when this customer visits our office, they're providing us information that associates them with that farm, and we're providing them what that farm number is for that particular farm. It may be that that customer is coming into our office, and when they tell us, where their farming operation is located, it's located in a, for lack of better words, a void in our farm records database. It's a piece of land that's never been in our farm record system before, and so at that point we're establishing a brand new farm. Either way, we're going to end up providing that customer a farm number, and at the end of the day, that customer is going to be establishing their relationship with that farm. And that's why when I said it's important to have the customer record first, because we are taking that customer and we are putting them on that farm, we're tying them together. We really have to have that customer record as the starting point to then get to properly associating with this farm record. What is that farm record? It's a GIS representation of the farm. So we've got the imagery so we can see, what that farm looks like from up above, if you will. We can see the tracts, and I'll talk about what I mean by tracts. We can see the fields on those tracts, and we capture all that within the farm record. That we have the farm, we have maybe one or more tracts, and we have maybe one or more fields on each tract. That farm record also includes attribute information, farmland acres, cropland acres, identifies what fields are considered to be highly erodible land, may identify potential wetland areas on that farm, includes things like base acres. When Jamie mentioned the ag-risk coverage, price loss coverage program that drives off of base acres, attributes include base acre information and yield information for participation in some of our programs. And it includes the parties that are associated with the farm. We will have an owner, we'll have an operator, and we may have additional tenants, just depending on the nature of how many folks have an interest in that land. So to establish that farm record, whether we're establishing a new farm record or associating that customer with an existing farm record and providing that farm number to them, what do we need? FSA needs information that supports that customer, that person, that entity's interest on the land. And that may include a deed to prove ownership if somebody's trying to claim ownership and that's their association with a farm. It may include a lease agreement. I'm not the owner, but I've got this lease agreement that says, I've got an annual lease or I've got a 5-year lease, whatever the case may be. So I'm not the owner of the property, but I am the operator or tenant of the property for farm records purposes. And based on that information, the customer will be associated with that farm record as applicable. A couple of alternative or different types of farm record situations that I felt like needed to have awareness. We talked about establishing ownership and the deed to establish ownership. When we look at tribal lands owned by allotments managed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, FSA may use title status reports to establish ownership by an allotment. And so FSA will create a customer record with that specific allotment, and that allotment is placed on the farm record as owner. So this is a little different than the deed that I mentioned, but we do have, depending on the location, the BIA, and the tribe, this just may be one thing that we see as a mechanism to identify ownership of tribal lands. And the other thing that a little different than our normal operating procedures, if you will, for farm records has to do with heirs property. Land that is maybe 2 or 3 generations or more, perhaps, removed from the original person that is still listed on the deed as the owner. That person is deceased, and we are 2 or 3 or 4 or more generations down the road as far as the heirs owning that property. And it's not real clear. We may know part of the heirs, we may know none of the heirs, we may know all of the heirs, but we only know where part of them are located and can contact them. And so some special provisions were written into the Farm Bill related to heirs property. And specifically, that allows an FSA county committee to consider some expanded list of documents or proof that a person is an operator of a farm. So that operator, under normal FSA operating rules, we'd say as an operator, you need to have a lease with an owner. We have operators that they're just unable to provide that lease because of the issues associated with identifying who that owner actually is of that heirs property. So it provides them a mechanism to provide other documents to the county committee to prove their operatorship or that tenancy on that farm. And we also expanded then the list of documents that county committees can consider to prove ownership of heirs property as well. So just to raise that for awareness that this is a special procedure written into the Farm Bill related to heirs property, expanding documents that we can use for operatorship, and then we've also expanded that for ownership as well as heirs property. All right, so we'll just look at the farm structure real fast. I've mentioned farms, I mentioned the words tract, and I talked about fields, and I'm going to throw a curveball at what a field is here in a second, but we'll start with farm. A farm is a unit of tracts that have the same owner and same operator. And so I may have, just give you an example, I may have an 80-acre tract of land, and I may have a 40-acre tract of land, and I may have a 20-acre tract of land. And so I got 3 tracts, all owner A, and operator 1 is the operator. So we've got 1 farm, 3 tracts, 1 owner, one guy operating there, 1 person operating it. And our provisions do allow multiple ownership farms to be possible if the owners agree, if the owners of each tract agree that those tracts can be put together and constituted as a single farm. And my operating experience with that, the practical experience I have with that in Nebraska where I'm based, perhaps is family ground that after the original owners died and kids inherited different pieces of property, maybe a son inherited, an 80, a grandson inherited a 40, a daughter inherited an 80. And so they have different ownership in what they own as far as tracts of land go. But because of the family unit, they choose to say, hey, just put this all under 1 farm number FSA. We still have multiple tracts, but put it all under 1 farm number because we've got a single operator involved that farms all this for us. The other thing to mention here with the farm, currently we have the ability to go down to a minimum size of 1/100th of an acre. That's roughly, I think, a 20 foot by 20 foot area. This specifically, we've looked at this as we see interest in urban and suburban participation in farm programs and ensuring that we've got the ability to capture a farm record down to a size that may be, appropriate for those small scale urban and suburban producers. All right, so I mentioned the word tract there too several times. And what is a tract? You see the definition here on the screen, but I think what I would tell you from a layman's perspective is a tract is what I would call the transactional piece of land in a farm. By transactional, what do I mean? It's the 80 acres, it's the 40 acres, it's the 160 acres. It's how I see, at least in Nebraska, land get bought and sold. So that's how I think of a tract. The caveat may be here, you notice that this definition specifies within a physical county. So we do specify that a tract has to be within 1 physical county. So we may have a contiguous piece of land that is intersected by a county boundary, and that would actually cause that contiguous piece of land to be considered 2 tracts for FSA because of that physical county requirement. And then the curveball on fields that I mentioned, the official term we use talking about fields is a common land unit, or a CLU. And that is exactly really matches to what you probably think of as a field. It is also includes differentiation between, maybe a cropland field sitting beside a pasture field. It's also got some forest land or timberland on it. So we differentiate things not only between land use, the cropland versus pasture versus forest. We also differentiate them between management practices, things like that. But really, I think for most of our traditional ag producers, at least, they just think of these as the different fields on their property, maybe with the added piece of having forest lands also identified as a quote unquote field on their farm record. All right, so that gets us through the customer record and farm record piece. One of the other things that and Jamie mentioned this as she was going through her presentation, the historically underserved producers, and she mentioned the CCC 860 form, and just wanted to take a little bit of a closer look into those historically underserved groups and the criteria for those groups. And you see those four different groups identified here on the screen. And so let's take a look at each one of them. First of all, I guess the question before we take a look at each group is, why do we care? And I think particularly for FSA programs, we have provided some enhanced or expanded benefits to folks in these historically underserved categories, those farmer ranchers that fall within one of those four. For example, for the Emergency Revenue Program, ERP2, or what we call the Pandemic Assistance Revenue Program, PARP, we provided an increased payment factor for those programs. Jamie already mentioned the service fee waiver for the NAP program. And also for one of our pandemic programs, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, the second version of that, or what we called CFAP2, there was authorization for an additional 15% top up to historically underserved producers as well. All right, so we'll look at those categories. First one being beginning farmer rancher. And we see that here is a person that has not operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 years and materially and substantially participates in the operation. And for an entity, we apply a 50% test. Basically, this 50% of the ownership interest, the individuals holding 50% of the ownership interest in that entity meet this requirement of not operating a farm or ranch for more than 10 years, is to determine if that entity can be considered a beginning farmer or rancher entity, if you will. The second historically underserved category, socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher, and that is identified by groups who have been subject to racial, ethnic, or gender prejudice because of their identity as members of a group as listed here. And the one I would probably just notate, and you'll see this when we look at the 860 form itself, women in this category, depending on the program, the identity, excuse me, of a person as being female may or may not provide enhanced benefits to that person. So it just depends on, and I say that because it depends on which law is tied to the historically underserved producer group. But when I mentioned the ERP benefits, the NAP fee waiver, and the top-up payment for CFAP2, that 15% bonus, women was included in that group. So just call that out because females are not always specifically included in those enhanced benefits, depending on the structure of the law. The third group, veteran farmer or rancher, and this is a farmer rancher who has not operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 years total, or perhaps they have operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 years, but they obtained their status as a veteran during the most recent 10-year period. So kind of two tests there, if you will, an if or then test to determine a veteran farmer or rancher status. And again, similar to what we saw with beginning farmer or rancher, we apply that 50% test rule for legal entities. And then the last category, the limited resource farmer or rancher. This is the criteria here is driven from direct or indirect gross farm sales that do not exceed an amount identified in this limited resource farmer or rancher self-determination tool. and that's an NRCS tool. And if you skip to the next screen, you see here, at least to 2020, what the threshold was for direct and indirect gross sales, the corresponding years that we use. And then the tool, I think, is on the next slide. This is the best place. I didn't include dollar figures here, but this is the best place to go for a producer wanting to know if they fall into that limited resource farmer or rancher. It's driven by their location, the state and county that they're in, and they can enter their information into this tool, and it will basically generate the correct guidance on their status as a limited resource farmer or rancher. All right, Jamie mentioned the CCC 860 form, and that is our certification to capture any of these 4 criteria that we talked about on this form. And as Jamie mentioned, that form, that CCC 860, is a required form to get these enhanced benefits, including the service fee waiver, included, as Jamie mentioned, the basically the application for NAP coverage that comes as a result of that 860 being filed as well. And the form here, and as I mentioned earlier, with the distinction of women may or may not be included in qualifying criteria for an historically underserved benefit. I mentioned that because of the way the question 3 here is worded, where the women category is out by itself, essentially, among the other groups that you see listed. So again, that was my rationale for explaining why we would separate out women there from the other groups and ask that question a little bit differently. The limited resource tool, or the limited resource question on the 860, and again, you see the reference to the self-determination tool listed there. So that'll be the tool, again, that the producer uses to determine how they may want to certify on in this question. Part C on the next slide is the beginning farmer or rancher certification, and also then Part D is the certification of veteran farmer or rancher. Okay, the last thing I had to talk about that's the kind of final building block of things that I have is acreage reporting or crop reporting. And acreage reporting is simply a producer telling FSA what crops may be growing on their farm, what the use of those crops may be, and it may be not crops that they planted, it may be pasture, it may be grass, it may be native grass. We get specific to even the type of grass it is and what the intended use is for that grass, whether it's grazing, whether it's for forage. Maybe they're not doing anything with it and it's just left standing. We can take cover crop reports, so that if a producer planted a cover crop and they want to report that, we have the ability to take those acreage reports. You see here the deadlines, and I would mention that these are the 4 most predominant deadlines. November 15th is a small grain deadline for a lot of the United States. January 15th is another small grain deadline for another part of the United States. So basically between November 15th and January 15th, we've covered the small grain deadlines for the contiguous US. January 2nd, the deadline for honeybee producers or honey producers, bee owners, to report the colonies that they have. And then July 15th, pretty much our standard deadline for spring seeded crops and forage crops, the grass crops, July 15th. Who can report or file an acreage report for a farm? Farm operators, the owners, and tenants tenants or sharecroppers can also file that acreage report, but only for the acreage that they have an interest in. Another thing that I would offer on this slide is, depending on the program rules, for example, CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, or the Ag Risk Coverage, Price Loss Coverage Commodity Program, ARC PLC, there are requirements on what part of the farm has to be reported, or do all acres have to be reported or not? And that's all really program driven by what the program needs as an acreage report for eligibility for that program. Mentioned here that a power of attorney can also file that 578. Somebody that has power of attorney for the operator can execute that 578, that acreage certification on behalf of the operator. And the note on the bottom, producers that don't participate in farm programs are not required to report. They're not required to file an acreage report, but I would go ahead and expand that and say that they're not prevented from filing an acreage report. And I would actually take the position and encourage folks who potentially have an interest in participating in FSA programs to go ahead, establish that farm record, and file an acreage report. Nothing says that you have to participate in a program. And more often than not, there may be a program down the road or a program that legislation authorizes that we may not see, we may not see coming. And having that acreage report on file may prove beneficial at that point in time when all of a sudden there is a program that customer is interested in participating in. FSA already has an acreage report, and so we're already one further step down the road at assisting that customer. The 578 is that acreage report, the FSA 578. We talked about the acreage reporting deadlines, the 4 most predominant acreage reporting deadlines on that initial screen. So we won't mention those again. However, if a customer does not file that acreage report by the applicable acreage reporting deadline, we do have some late file procedures as long as that is reported by the subsequent year's acreage reporting deadline. There are fees involved, and the existence of the crop has to be verified. So again, I go back to, it's always better to timely file, and even if you may not have a program need at the time, then potentially have to navigate some of these late file procedures for acreage reporting. And these are the things that, as I mentioned from the get-go, that we would look for in an acreage report. The crop type, intended use is important. Acres, we will take a map and ask this stuff to be documented on a map, including the field boundaries for that crop, planting dates, patterns, who has a share, whether that crop's irrigated or not. We do have the ability to take prevent plant acreage reports and also failed acres reports. And then there may be additional information depending on the type of crop that's being reported. So this slide has some of the acreage reporting information on it, including the fact sheet and a link to our 2CP handbook that it provides our all of our policy for acreage reporting. And with that, I will hand it over to Becca Satoris to cover payment limitation and payment eligibility.
Thanks, Tyler. As Tyler said, my name is Becca Satoris. I'm the Farm Service Agency Program Manager for Payment Limitation and Payment Eligibility. Today, I'm going to cover FSA's current payment limitation and payment eligibility provisions. And I say it that way because they change with legislation, they change with farm bills, and with any legislation that enacts a new program. So I may say that more than once. So first, we're gonna look at FSA's payment limitation provisions. They include the individual program payment limitation amount, or the maximum amount that an individual or entity can earn under that specific program. We'll talk about direct attribution, which is our process of attributing payments issued to legal entities and to the members that make up those entities and members of joint operations. I'm going to talk about some exceptions to the general payment limitation rules. And then again, just keep in mind that as individual legislation is passed, there could be different rules for different years. Next slide, please. So the general rule, as this slide indicates, is that program legislation establishes the maximum dollar amount of payment limitation that can be issued for that payment for that program. And then those are limited by the person or legal entity that's earning the payment, whether they're earning it directly or indirectly. And don't worry, because I'll talk about this enough that hopefully it will become clear. Payment limitations are generally established in the Farm Bill. It gives us overarching payment limitation provisions. And then our individual program legislation, if it's outside of the Farm Bill, will give us any exceptions to that general rule. Next slide, please. Payments that are made directly or indirectly to a person are combined with all other payments made to that individual, including their individual share of the legal entity that they're a member of that receives payment. This is our direct attribution process. And so if any one individual member has reached their individual payment limitation and they're a member of an entity, then that entity's payment is reduced by that member's share to prevent any individual person from exceeding payment limitation. That would also apply to embedded entities, as each entity has its own payment limitation as well. Next slide, please. So payments that are made directly or indirectly to an individual person cannot exceed that amount that's specified in the individual program as the payment limitation amount. For a joint operation or a general partnership, or such as a general partnership, that payment limitation amount for the joint operation is determined by multiplying that same maximum payment amount by the number of persons or legal entities that comprise the ownership of the joint operation. So when we talk about a person has one payment limitation, a joint operation can have multiple limitations. Legal entities, so like corporations, LLCs, limited partnerships, those types of entities, they also have a single payment limitation, so they can't exceed that annual amount. Next slide, please. And so when we talk about direct attribution, we talk about 4 levels of ownership. FSA is going to track payments through 4 levels of ownership. Another way of thinking about 4 levels of ownership would be 3 member levels. So the entity itself is the first level of ownership, and we have 3 member levels that comprise our 4 levels. Each person or each person or legal entity that holds an interest in that payment entity is then attributed a portion of the payment entity's payment that's equal to their share of ownership, either directly or indirectly. Next slide. And when we get to that 4th level of ownership, though, if we haven't reached a person owner, so if we have an embedded entity that has ownership at the 4th level of ownership, then we're going to apply a payment reduction to that payment entity representing the indirect interest of our 4th level entity. And I will go through an example of that just to make sure that that's clear. Next slide. So in this example, you'll see Corporation A. That's what I would refer to as the payment entity. Corporation A is owned 50% by Corporation B and 50% by Corporation C. Since we don't have individuals at that 2nd ownership level or 1st member level, then we go down to the 3rd ownership level. There we find that Corporation B is owned 100% by individual A. So on that side, that 50% ownership of Corporation A, we would have no reduction because we got to a person at the 3rd level. But Corporation C is owned 50-50 by Corporations D and E. So then we're going to go to the 4th level of ownership. And there, again, just like with Corporation B, Corporation D is owned 100% by an individual. So that corporation has no payment reduction associated with it. But Corporation E is owned by individual C and Corporation F at 50% each. Next slide, please. So in that example, Corporation F is a fourth level owner that's not an individual person. They're indirectly holding 12.5% ownership of Corporation A. You get there by 50% of 50% of 50%, right? It's 12.5% indirect ownership. So Corporation A's payment is going to be reduced by the 12.5% share that represents the ownership of Corporation F. That's a very simple example of direct attribution. And as entities get more complicated and more complex in their ownership structure, the more difficult it is to really follow the direct attribution process. Next slide, please. So that's payment limitation in a nutshell, very high level introduction to payment limitations. And now I'm going to talk about payment eligibility. Programs have program eligibility requirements, and then they also have payment eligibility requirements. I'm going to talk in general about what our general payment eligibility requirements are and provide some information on some different exceptions. Producers are required to file Form CCC 902, which is our farm operating plan, if they don't already have one on file. This form is a continuous certification, so once it's been filed, if there are no changes, either to the farming operation or to the legislation that provides the requirements for these payment eligibility provisions, then our CCC 902 does not need to be refiled on an annual basis. This form is going to collect a whole lot of information about the farming operation, including all of the land that is associated with the operation, who owns the land or what the lease agreements, whether they're cash leases or share leases, the equipment that is provided to the operation or used by the operation and where it comes from, the labor and management provided by the members or the individuals associated with the operation, or whether they hire it or hire custom services. And then we're going to also get information on the sources of capital that farming operation utilizes, as well as the citizenship status of the members of entities and their status as a minor child. Next slide, please. So our preference is to have a producer come visit the county office and complete an interview style question about the farming operation. What that looks like is one of our FSA employees will ask a series of questions, and the responses provided by the producer will drive the follow-up questions. So producers are then only required to answer the questions that are applicable to their type of farming operation, and the follow-up questions that come from their specific answers. We do have a manual CCC 902 that can be completed by a producer if for some reason they are unable to come to a county office or would prefer not to. Or if they do happen to visit a county office and for some reason our system is not available at the time, so that it's not a wasted trip into the office, they'd still be able to fill the 902 out. It's just a little bit more cumbersome of the process, so we do prefer this interview style. Next slide, please. Any changes to a farming operation that result in an increase of the number of persons, of individual persons, to whom payment limitation applies, may require that the farming operation meet what's called substantive change. Substantive change requirements, if they're not met, then those newly added members of the farming operation would not be considered eligible for payment. Next slide, please. There are several ways to meet substantive change. One way is a 20% increase in agricultural land that's associated with that farming operation, and that 20% would be per person. That is an increase in the number of persons. It can also be met through the addition of an adult family member. And basically, when you add an adult family member to an existing operation, then the operation doesn't have to meet the other substantive change requirements. It can also be met through an eligible change in the ownership of equipment, land, and or livestock. Basically, the operation has to become larger or more complex to necessitate that additional person. FSA looks at ownership in an operation or changes made to an operation as of June 1st of the program year to be considered effective for that year. We do have some exceptions to that general June 1st rule, but in general, if changes are made by June 1st, then we're going to consider them effective for that same year. Next slide, please. So we have a provision called the notification of interest, and this applies to FSA as well as NRCS programs. And the general rule is that a legal entity that is requesting payments is required to report the name, address, and tax identification number of each person who owns either directly or indirectly any interest in that legal entity. Next slide, please. It's the failure of reporting this information that has some variation from FSA to NRCS. With NRCS programs, the failure to report the tax identification number of any person with an ownership share in that entity will result in the entity being ineligible for benefits. But for FSA, if you report everything else about the individual members of the entity, so their name, their address, but you fail to report the tax identification number of a person who holds a 10% or greater ownership interest in that payment entity, then the entity is ineligible for payments. But if that person that for whom a tax identification number is not provided holds less than a 10% ownership interest, then the payment is just going to be reduced by their share. So if they hold a 5% interest and don't present their tax identification number, then the payment entity's payments are reduced by 5% for FSA programs. Next slide, please. So one of the, I guess, biggest topics that we deal with payment eligibility is the certification of adjusted gross income. This is applicable to most USDA or FSA at least and NRCS programs. And so there's some variations to the way they're handled, I guess, is the best way to put that. And I'll talk about some of that now, as well as some of the basic requirements. So to be eligible for most programs, a producer has to be able to report an average adjusted gross income over a 3-year period on the form CCC 941 of less or $900,000 or less, right? It's an average over 3 years of $900,000 or less. I gave some examples of the applicable 3-year program on the slide. We're currently in the 2023 year, so if you're certifying 2023 AGI compliance, then you're going to average the 2019, 2020, and 2021 adjusted gross incomes as reported to the IRS on your tax returns. Average those 3 years to get your certification for 2023. If that is $900,000 or less, then you're able to certify on the CCC 941. If it is more than that, and you file a joint income tax return, say with a spouse, you would be able to have a CPA or a tax attorney split your income and provide a certification on your behalf of what the average adjusted gross income would have been if you had filed an individual tax return. Next slide. Some programs will additionally tie some additional eligibility or increased payment limitation to the farm AGI. So if at least 75% of a producer's average AGI is derived from farming, ranching, or forestry related activities as defined by the secretary, and the producer provides the required certification, which generally is another form that must be filled out, which varies by program, and usually that requires a certification by a CPA or tax attorney, then that producer may be eligible for an increased payment limitation, or they may be considered to have met the average AGI provisions, even if their income exceeded that $900,000 limit. Or there are some programs that will allow for a producer's 2020 AGI as a sole income to be less than $900,000 for the producer to be considered to have met the AGI provisions. So if that producer's 2020 income was lower for whatever reason than their average, so their average is in excess of 900,000, but their 2020 AGI by itself is less than 900,000. We have some programs that would consider that to have met the AGI provisions. Next slide, please. So as Tyler highlighted some differences in farm or some specifics in farm records policy that was specific to Indian tribes or tribal organizations. I've got some slides in here that talk about how payment eligibility is a little bit different for these groups of individuals. Next slide. So when I talk about an Indian tribe or a tribal organization, I am referring to the definition on this slide. So I'm talking about an Indian tribe, band, nation, pueblo, or other organized group or community. And this does include Alaska Native villages or regional corporation as defined in or established under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act that is recognized as eligible for special programs and services provided by the U.S. because of their status as Indians. That's a mouthful, but it's important to remember that that's the definition that we're using. Next slide. Another way of looking at this is our payment limitation and payment eligibility provisions are generally housed in the Code of Federal Register, or Code of Federal Regulations, sorry, at 7 CFR Part 1400. And the definition there of Indian tribe is the definition from the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. And the reference is there for anybody who wants to go look at that. But that is basically the language that was on the previous slide. So in our 7 CFR Part 1400, we have a regulation that states that Indian tribes are not, that the AGI provisions and other payment limitation provisions do not apply to Indian tribes or tribal organizations. The reason for this is that Indian tribes are not included under the definition of a person or a legal entity as defined in 7 CFR Part 1400 for applying the payment eligibility and payment limitation provisions. So we're not going to impose any limitations, we're not imposing any restrictions, and these are all federally recognized Indian tribes or tribally chartered entities that have applied for program benefits. Next slide, please. So there's a chart on the next couple of slides that show how the rules are applied because they're applied differently depending on the specific situation. If we have a farming operation that is conducted by the tribe or the tribally chartered entity on land that the tribe owns, the tribe rents or otherwise acquires, then this exception is in full force. There's no payment limitation, AGI provisions don't apply, you don't use direct attribution provisions. And the only requirement on the CCC 982 is to collect the land information for that farming operation. Next slide. However, if we have a farming operation that is conducted by individual Native Americans or groups of Native Americans that are represented by the Bureau of Indian Affairs or BIA on allotted land, Tyler talked about allotted land, then the BIA is required to provide certification that no one member of that farming operation will exceed payment limitation and that all of the members of that operation are in compliance with the AGI provisions. So the individual members do not have to certify that, but the BIA representative is going to have to certify on behalf of the farming operation. We will then consider all members to be actively engaged in farming because of the land ownership. And we will move forward with eligibility determinations based on the assumptions of these certifications by the BIA. Next slide. But if we have a farming operation that is conducted either by an individual Native American or by a legal entity that is comprised of members who are Native Americans, then these exceptions really don't apply. The individuals are required to file the CCC 941 and the 902 They're subject to payment limitation and direct attribution provisions. They're subject to AGI provisions. Next slide, please. So this was a very high level overview of payment limitation and payment eligibility provisions for FSA programs. But I'd like to leave you with a couple thoughts on keeping your records current. And these are not only eligibility and payment limitation records, these are all of your records at Farm Service Agency. Updating your contact information, that includes your phone number, your cell phone number, an address, or an email address if you have one. Will allow FSA to keep you informed of changes as they occur, or reach out and contact you when they have a specific need, get information from you. Updating your land ownership and lease information as changes occur is also important to keep your eligibility paperwork up to date. And then reporting changes to your operation structure. If you change from an individual operating as a sole proprietor to a joint operation, for example, if you bring on a partner, if you move from a corporation to a general partnership or a general partnership to a corporation, those types of changes, they do impact the eligibility determinations that FSA makes. So it's important to let us know when those changes occur. We would also recommend that if you're considering a change to your farm operation structure for tax planning purposes or for succession planning purposes, that you reach out to your local office and ask them some questions about what impacts that's going to have or what requirements you're going to have to meet to continue being determined as eligible for payments, and what impact there might be to payment limitation. The office can't offer you advice on how to structure your farming operation, but they can give you information on what a change would do. Next slide, please. It's also important to notify FSA of any banking changes. Most of our payments are issued through direct deposit right into your bank account. So if you have a change to your bank account and you don't let us know, that's going to unnecessarily delay your payment. Usually we can still find it and get it to you, but it's a whole lot quicker if you have your correct banking information up front. Ensure that your farm operating plan or your CCC 902 reflects your actual current farm operation with respect to land, labor, capital, management, and equipment contributions to the operation. This is important as you can be selected for a review of that farm operating plan. And if we find that you are operating in a different manner, it can result in a determination of ineligibility for payments. Keeping FSA up to date on changes in interest for livestock or crops that are part of your operation will help us to keep you informed of reporting requirements and keep you up to date on any other deadlines that might be applicable to the programs, provide you information on new programs as they come out, those types of things. So it's really in your best interest to keep your FSA records current. With that, I think that's the end of my presentation. Yep. So now I'm going to turn it over to some of our outreach staff to talk about receipt for service and outreach resources.
Thank you. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Tyler. All right, for this section, we're going to talk about receipt for service. To ensure that all existing and potential USDA customers are being properly serviced at local offices, federal law and USDA regulations require that a receipt for service be provided to any current or prospective producer or landowner who requests in person or in writing a benefit or service from Farm Service Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Rural Development. If you are a landowner or ag producer, all representatives of these agencies must provide you a receipt for service to document any approved, denied, or requested service. If you are not provided a receipt for service at the end of your visit or transaction, be sure to ask for one, as it is your right. USDA is currently working on reviewing and improving receipt for service to ensure it's carried out in the most effective way possible. So it's just an important component of what we do at FSA is your right for a receipt for service. All right. So at this time, we're just going to share some opportunities that are available through the outreach office. We value and we rely on partners like you, NACD, to help us spread the word and message of federal ag assistance. We have an amazing team of USDA offices nationwide. We have employees in over 2,300 service centers that help you sign up and enroll for benefits that are so important and critical to farm and ranch operations. So first, I want to talk about a key opportunity to have a voice in FSA through the county committee elections. And we'll also talk about how we can connect you with some FSA resources and support. County committee elections. No more than 7,700 dedicated members of the agriculture community serve on FSA county committees. Nowhere else in the federal government do citizens have a more meaningful and direct role in government administration. Committees are made up of 3 to 11 members who serve 3-year terms. Elections occur each year in certain local administrative areas. We call them LAAs. And they are the election areas for farm service agency committees. And they're by a single county or a multi-county jurisdiction, depending on the area. And it may also include LAAs that are focused on an urban or a suburban area. This past year, we released a new county committee election GIS locator tool for FSA customers, which provides you an opportunity to identify the LAA that serves you or your farming interest. We encourage all farmers and ranchers to participate in the nomination and voting process. We also emphasize participation of women, minority, and beginning producers. And it's vitally important that the demographics of our committees reflect the communities they serve. If fair representation is not achieved through the election process, USDA takes steps to appoint a minority advisor and or a SDA voting member as applicable to have a voice on FSA county committees. So now I want to just briefly touch on some of the dates. So this is the schedule for the 2023. August 1st, that was the final date to submit nominations. And then November 6th, ballots will be mailed to all eligible voters. Early December 4th, 2023 is the last day to return voted ballots or be postmarked to the local service center office. January 1st, all newly elected county committee members and alternates take office. So the foundation of our mission and vision rests upon USDA's core of strong ethics, customer service, teamwork, inclusive decision-making, and fiscal responsibility. Our office cores of the outreach office, excuse me, we support the spirit of agency values through our own additional core values. Farm Service Agency has assigned outreach coordinators in all 51 states and all 2,124 FSA counties offices nationwide. These coordinators serve as your primary point of contacts for FSA outreach initiatives and activities. You can find your FSA state outreach coordinator on our website at fsa.usda.gov/outreach. And then within that, each county has their own county office outreach coordinator. And we rely heavily on partners like you to help us spread the word about FSA programs. And we encourage you to reach out to our staff and see how we can work together through, shared outreach availability, through supporting your own events, having us maybe speak at one of your workshops. There are many ways that we can work together. So here, I just want to alert you to an opportunity to subscribe to National Outreach News. If you go to fsa.usda.gov/outreach, on the bottom right of the page under sign up for updates, you can plug in your email address. And then when you subscribe, it's under news and events. And then you will select National FSA Outreach and Education. You can also select other topics of interest. And then you could adjust your settings so that you can, get your notifications as you want on a daily or an immediate as they come out. These are some of the online resource tools that are available on farmers.gov. We have a conservation tool, a loan assistance tool, a farm loan discovery tool. We have key program information, including hot topics of interest on farmers.gov. And then you can also find and locate your USDA Service Center. All right, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Amanda Robertson, to talk about the USDA's Beginning Farmer Rancher program.
Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, and hopefully we can share some of this information with you to help you all as you're doing your job through the conservation districts, and then help you better help your customers that you have in your local areas. So I want to share with you what we have, our USDA Beginning Farmer and Rancher Coordinators. As Jen just talked about, the Farm Service Agency has the state outreach coordinators, and our USDA Beginning Farmer Coordinators, they also may be housed within the Farm Service Agency. But these group of individuals, they come from either FSA, the Natural Resource Conservation, or the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Risk Management Agency, or Rural Development. So they work across FPAC and Rural Development to kind of give that broad overview of each of those agencies and direct beginning farmers and ranchers, underserved individuals where they need to go. So the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Coordinator serve as a first point of contact for individuals if they're just initially connecting with USDA, or perhaps they're just getting started farming. Whatever the case may be, we encourage folks to reach out to them. Every state has one, just as they have the state outreach coordinators. The territories are also covered with these individuals. And so we have our directory on farmers.gov/new farmers. And there you can look at the state, the name, telephone number, email address for those individuals are listed there. And we encourage you to direct folks there, encourage you all to connect with them and to build that partnership, to collaborate, see how you may be able to work in your state or in your local area. We also encourage folks to utilize our USDA Service Center locator. There you can pull up a map of the US, choose the state, choose the county. It'll give local contact information to where those farmers or ranchers need to be directed to get one-on-one assistance. And that's the really neat thing about our USDA service centers. Of course, our folks can go there, visit one-on-one with those individuals to get assistance. Next slide. So just to touch briefly on each of these, as we mentioned, those individuals covering each of those agencies, just to give you a little bit of information how each of the agencies support our beginning farmers and ranchers. And when we talk about our beginning farmers and ranchers, that's anyone who has not operated a farm for more than 10 years. So NRCS serves as a technical assistance provider and a financial provider. The most popular program that folks tend to utilize is the EQIP program, as it offers cost share opportunities or financial assistance, if you will. There's some incentives and priorities through that program that assist our beginning farmers and ranchers as they can identify as historically underserved. Next slide. Also, the Risk Management Agency. Now, they're structured a little bit differently. RMA is kind of a regionally based agency, but they have folks in each of the areas overseeing the crop insurance corporation and those crop insurance in their local areas. And a list of those agents is available on the RMA website. You can go there, look at your local area, help folks to connect, because certainly it's very important for beginning farmers and ranchers or any producer to be aware and to participate in crop insurance or any other insurance, as there are many things that can come along that's beyond their control that can happen. So insurance is always an important thing. So we always try to make sure that our producers know about those opportunities. Next slide. Rural development. Of course, they're very, very important in our rural areas. They play a huge role by offering direct and guaranteed programs. They can work much like the loan programs that Brannigan talked about with FSA. However, FSA specifically is geared toward farm production, purchasing those farms or ranches, and then supporting that agricultural production, whereas rural development has the ability to help folks purchase or construct homes in rural areas. So we really, if folks come to us, they're needing assistance with housing, if it isn't fitting for them to be able to utilize those services through our farm loan programs, then we refer them to rural development for those assistance. And then there's grant opportunities available. I'm sure, as you all are well aware, you may get questions about what free money is out there for farmers and ranchers. Unfortunately, we don't have any free money to help folks initially get started that we have at USDA. There's no grants there. However, rural development has a program called the Value Added Producer Grant Program. So this is for individuals, and if they're adding value to their products, if, for example, they're growing tomatoes and making salsa, they're doing berries and making jams or jellies, they're growing grapes, they're making wine, things like that, then there's an opportunity for them to apply and receive the Value Added Producer Grant Program. There are incentives, once again, for this, for the beginning farmers and ranchers. In the ranking process, it's a competitive program. And then the Rural Energy for America program, also, if they're looking to make energy efficiency improvements on their farm, if they've got a shop building, they want to do LED lighting, or if they're wanting to do geothermal heating and cooling, those are opportunities that they can participate in through the REAP program. The Ag Marketing Service, this agency is very important to our farmers and ranchers, as they house all of our, market data. This is where market reports are housed. They're responsible of getting those published, getting that information out there. They are in charge of the oversight of the organic programs, which sometimes they have that administered by the Farm Service Agency, by the state departments of agriculture. But there's one program specifically, the Organic Certification Cost Share Program. So for our organic producers, if they are looking for cost share assistance and support in getting organic certified, then that's a program that's supported through AMS. Also, they're involved in the commodity procurement and the local food grants. So this is where folks are interested in the local food movement. They're interested in farmers markets. Again, these programs often are administered by the state departments of agriculture. It could vary from state to state, but they have the local food promotion program, local farmers market promotion program, and opportunities such as that, where the group of individuals can come together and apply for grants and receive funding through those programs. And then just building a network and having resources. This is good for all of us who support farmers and ranchers across the country to be aware of the opportunities that are available, as this can vary from state to state or vary within your local communities, but kind of an overarching, all inclusive, just high-level breakdown here, because these opportunities are available across the country in most areas. Of course, we're aware of Extension and the services that they offer through the educational opportunities. Many times farmers or ranchers or potential customers come to us at USDA. Perhaps they're not ready yet to participate. And so we always encourage our beginning farmer coordinators, our state outreach coordinators, to rely on those resources external to USDA in their states or their local communities that can support that individual for their needs. So Extension is a huge partner and a great resource to refer folks to for educational opportunities, for getting folks involved in networking, allowing them leadership opportunities if they're looking for financial funding opportunities. Farm bureaus nationwide, it's in each state. They have a program for young farmers and ranchers, a great networking and allowing them to take some leadership roles through that. The Young Farmer Coalition, of course, there's a breakdown of local commodity groups in each of the states. And then, of course, you know, you all are aware of your district conservation board. We look at that as being a leadership opportunity for individuals as well as networking. And it has been mentioned already at FSA, we support the county committee process and that group. So it's just a good opportunity to always, you know, have a network yourself so you can better support and provide resources to those customers that come to you looking for guidance. And I'll turn it back over to you, Jen.
Thank you, Amanda. All right, well, I just wanted to leave some last comments, referring folks to your local USDA Service Center for assistance and to apply for FSA programs and benefits. You can visit us online at our website, fsa.usda.gov, as well as farmers.gov. Those are two portals to FSA service. With that, I want to thank you for your time today. This concludes our presentation portion, and I'll turn it back over to you, Latrina.
All right, thank you all so much for your presentations today. I know we're running a little over time, but I wanted to have a little time for a question and answer session. So what I can do is I can go ahead and go into the chat and look what we have here so far. And if you'd like to add to that, or if you'd like to unmute yourselves and ask a question, that would be fine as well. The first question I have up here was, let's see. Someone asked for the form for disadvantaged or beginning farmers. I don't know if you all have that form. You could possibly drop it into the chat. And then I can go, the next one is, does a piece of land need to be currently used for crop or livestock production to be eligible for a FSN? Also, any minimum production amount requirements for land or people to be eligible for FSA programs? Wanted to see if any of you could answer that question.
I'll jump in quickly. It looks like Jamie has provided the link to the CCC 860 Socially Disadvantaged Limited Resource Beginning and Veteran Farmer and Rancher Certification. So that is in the chat.
Thank you.
Additionally, the CRP grassland fact sheet is provided in the chat. There was a question from Taylor Marshall. And it looks like there was also, I'm sorry, a question on sand removal.
Yes.
And Jamie said, yes, sand removal may be an eligible activity authorized under ECP, that's the Emergency Conservation Program, debris removal. Specific information to current ECP signups, underway or past signups may be obtained by contacting the local service center. More details are available at the fact sheet that was provided.
So the question from David Mack, I can reread that question. It was, does a piece of land need to be currently used for crop or livestock production to be eligible for an FSN?
I think Tyler, I'll turn that question over to Tyler.
You bet. So I think the answer there is no, it doesn't necessarily have to be used for crop or livestock production to be eligible for a farm service number or farm serial number. You know, we generally tend to think that people who establish or want to establish a farm record are folks who have an interest in participating in our programs. So the probability, if they want to participate in our programs, that it may actually have a crop or livestock production on it, but it may be that it's CRP grasslands, or it's some other program that may, specific to that program, may or may not require the production of a crop or livestock to be in that program. So I think the answer to that is no, and it really depends on what the focus of that potential customer, you know, whose farm that is, what their focus is for participation. And then as to the production amount requirements for land to be eligible for FSA programs, again, I think it's probably back on the specific program. You know, we deal with a wide variety of customers, small and large scale, including I mentioned, you know, the urban, suburban producers who may be producing something on something as small as the size of a city lot. So I think that's back to the program, but there's no, as far as just getting a farm number, there's no specific requirements, but the program itself may have some tie. And I think I can say fairly safely that you know, most of our FSA programs have some general requirement that production, whether it's big scale or large scale, is of a commercial and for-profit nature, not just a hobby for me to grow my garden and you know, eat the produce out of my own garden. It's focused on a commercial intent to you know, generate a business or generate a profit, establish a business enterprise.
Thank you, Tyler. Someone did ask the question, will this presentation be available for later use? It will be. You will actually be sent a recording of the presentation this week, and you'll also it'll also be on our YouTube channel, NACD's YouTube channel. The next question was working on, I think this is more of a working on the unclear titles issue for NACD, worried that the 10% ownership stipulation may further impact those who try to access programs offered by NRCS or NACD. Is there a parallel for underserved entities as with tribal unity? There is anyone who could answer that question or?
Latrina,
Okay.
would you mind repeating that question? I'm very sorry.
Yes,
Didn't hear
sorry,
it.
no problem. It says working on the unclear titles issue for NACD, worried that the 10% ownership stipulation may further impact those who try to access programs offered by NRCS or NACD. Is there a parallel for underserved entities as with tribal unity? That might be more of an NRCS question, I'm not sure.
Latrina and Jennifer, would that be a question that we could follow up after the session today? I feel it would
Yes,
be better if we were to engage others before we provided a response to make sure we provide the proper clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to the next question. Nancy Carter will get your question answered via email. The next question is, how can soil and water conservation districts get access to FSA registered producers, especially those identified as historically underserved producers in our respective counties, in order to provide targeted outreach and promote programs?